For the fifth time in 5 months, candidates vying for the Republican presidential nomination squared off in a debate, but this was the first time following the terrorist attacks in Paris and San Bernardino, California. This was last night on CNN. Joining us today, Chris Casteel from the Oklahoman's Washington, D.C. Bureau. Chris, how are you?
I'm good, Dave. Thanks.
I know you just got off a conference call or listening to a press conference with Janet Yellen, who changed things on the Federal Reserve, raising the interest rates from zero basically to 0.25 to 0.5%. Lots of news happening last night and today, right?
Yeah, it's hopping here in D.C. 10 days before Christmas for sure. I mean, you had the interest rate hike, the first in a decade, and more symbolic than everything to just kind of get on the road to normalizing interest rates, which had been at zero since the great crash of 2008. Financial crisis of 2008, and then in the middle of the night they released the copy of the massive spending bill that will wrap up Congress's main work here for the year, and all the kind of the policy provisions that were put in there. So it's over $1 trillion in spending for the various government agencies, but big importance to Oklahoma and its economy, and one of its primary industries there, oil and gas, is that they are going to lift the 40-year-old ban on exporting crude oil. So that's been in place since just after the Arab oil embargo of the early 70s, and that's a big deal. So that means for this kind of crude, this crude that's kind of backed up in refineries oil pipelines all around the country, they can at least relieve some of that pressure by selling it overseas.
Of course, that headline came out last night during the presidential debate on a day where Oklahoma announced that, facing a big-time budget deficit here, and I know that's coverage that you, Chris, will have in upcoming editions of the Oklahoman and on newsok.com, providing some context to what we're going through now, to what we saw back in the 1980s, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's, we're looking at that. There, some of myself and the business reports. I was a reporter. I was actually a student at OU during some of it, and then a reporter during a lot of it out at the state legislature. And it really was, and talking to some of the people who were around back then who remember it, the elected officials, bankers, oil people, economists, a depression. It was just one hard hit after another. It basically started symbolically in the summer of 1982 with the crash of Penn Square Bank. And just continued on, just where prices plummeting, oil prices plummeting, the state economy's dependence, state government's dependence on oil revenue, and the whole oil industry really just devastated the economy and state government. And what we've been asking people who were there then, who study it now, is it going to happen again? Could the 80s happen again? And mostly what I'm getting, is probably not, but we'll see.
We'll see. I know in our weekly wrap last weekend, Don Mecoy, the business editor for the Oklahoman, said the banks aren't in play here in Oklahoma quite as much, but again, that's a story we're digging into. The story we're talking about right now is last night's presidential debate. And Chris, amidst all the headlines that were floating around the debate, what did you see and hear?
To be honest, Dave, I thought the whole thing was kind of a mess, really. I mean, I really, for the people who are on the fence, still trying to decide among, however many candidates that might still be in play for them, 2, 3, I just don't know how they came out of that with any clear sense of whom they should support. Obviously the entire thing focused on national security, and, there was almost zero mention of the economy, really. So, and a lot of times it got bogged down in discussions over surveillance and what should be allowed, and questions about regime change and who was on whose side over in the Middle East. But even that the kind of confusing chaos that it descended into sometimes, where you really didn't know who was on what side and who was saying what, probably illustrated the many nuances of these debates, but also I was struck by how much inaccuracy, maybe I shouldn't have been, But I thought at times it was absolutely appalling. And, you're sitting here watching story after story trying to clean up after what those candidates said last night. The Washington Examiner, who I have an office with, they just released a really good story about Carly Fiorina's statement about all the generals that had quit under the Obama administration because they're dissatisfied. Well, I think she said 6, and she was wrong on 5 of them. So, again, it's frustrating while you're watching it. That they say so many inaccurate things, and the moderators, have some responsibility to clean it up. But really, you can't. At some point, you just can't even keep up with it all. Whether they're talking about their own positions or opponents' positions or historical facts. Anyway.
These debates are interesting to follow along on Twitter. In fact, these are the perfect sort of events or ceremonies that Twitter is really good for. And of course, you can follow Chris Casteel on Twitter at NewsOK Politics, because it provides some context or perhaps some instant questions of, did candidate X really just say that, or really believe that, or they're way off base here, or yeah, good point by that candidate. You're right. Carly Fiorina dropped some generals' names early on in the debate, and it was interesting that she took that turn. We also saw Trump versus Bush getting into a heated argument, and Rubio and Cruz squaring off throughout the debate.
You're right. I want to address your first point, about Twitter, and you're absolutely right on that. Twitter seems to be kind of dominated by journalists. At least I guess that's maybe my view of it, since that's mainly who I follow. But you really have a lot of them if you follow kind of a cross section of them, and you follow reporters who specialize in certain areas, whether it be economics or defense or Capitol Hill, whatever. If you have a good sampling, then when the candidates say things that are just absolutely wrong, or not, but you're constantly getting tweets that put things in context or correct things, and I think that is a good way actually to watch a debate. I think it would be helpful for a lot of people to do it that way. If you're one of those people who just wants to limit yourself to one viewpoint, probably I don't have any advice for you. But if you want to follow Wall Street Journal, Fox News, Meet the Press, Washington Post, New York Times, and be open to it all, then you may get a better experience. But get back to the other, and the Trump-Bush exchanges especially. I was watching some of the post-debate analysis both last night and this morning. I was kind of struggling with the idea that Jeb Bush had such a great debate last night, and nobody was saying that he knocked it out of the park. But I wondered, why anybody even characterized it as a good debate.
Do you think for Jeb Bush, and you're right, most of the websites, or a lot of the websites, listed him among the winners. But was that comparison to his performance in the other 4 debates?
Right. And to me, the exchanges with Trump were childish, really. I mean, I would, if I were running for president and saw myself doing that I'd probably be embarrassed by that. But if you strip away all that, and you focus on where we're at, we're in a Republican primary season right now. These people are trying to win the Republican vote. And you strip away all this, this kind of superficial, back and forth, and did he rise to the, what you've got is Jeb Bush. What you've got is a continuation of W. George W. sounds like his brother on the Middle East and on immigration. So is that really that's helpful to him at this point? I mean, maybe it will be, but there's been no indication so far in this primary season that what the Republican base wants is George W.
It seemed like, from what I could see, a measured performance by Donald Trump, and perhaps the big takeaway from his performance last night was that he said he wasn't going to go to the independent side. He would stay a Republican no matter what, right?
Right, and I misunderstood, or maybe I didn't take his first comments in the debate, toward the end of the debate, as being unequivocally would not run as an independent if he doesn't get the nomination. But after, in the post-debate interview on CNN, he sounded a lot more definitive about that he would not. So that is, that's a big story. But I'm not sure what else comes out of this debate, really. I mean, the other thing that I'm kind of surprised by, and I think, as we say in the newspaper business, there is no objective reader. People read stories people come to stories with their own biases, just as they obviously believe that we write them with obvious bias. But
they also believe that you put every headline yourself on a story.
Yeah, they do. But to me, a lot of times, it seems like that there's a lot of media that seem predisposed to dismissing Rand Paul as a candidate. Maybe they should, because he barely made the debate stage. He can't raise money, and he doesn't seem to be a very good candidate. But I think he does okay in these debates. Actually, I think he more than holds his own, and often he seems to be the one armed with the most facts.
I think you tweeted last night, it seems like, I believe that was the candidate you mentioned, Rand Paul. It seems like he's actually read the Constitution.
I do think that they've all read the Bill of Rights, but I was probably being a little facetious there. But I mean, he does seem to be, rather than just like knowing what they say, I think he seems to be up on, and there's more to we've obviously had, the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791, I believe, and now you've had 200 years of case law. And he seems to understand it all. I mean, he seems to understand where the Bill of Rights stands, what you're allowed to do. Especially, and of course, a lot of the debate last night was Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, due process stuff. But, the First Amendment got into it, too, with the arguments about barring Muslims.
I'll wrap it up with a couple graphics here. USA Today had a graphic today. The candidate mentioned the most in the fifth debate was Rubio by far, followed by Bush. Person who spoke the most, Ted Cruz, almost 16 minutes, followed by either Rubio or Trump. I've seen both sides of this, and then it kind of faded after that. And then you posted a graphic about the U.S. Air Force. I believe Trump mentioned something about the U.S. is now far behind, and a few candidates mentioned how we ranked internationally, perhaps worldwide, in the military force. You posted a graphic that showed that we're way ahead, especially in Air Force.
Oh, and it's air power. I had to clarify that tweet a little bit by saying that it's not just our Air Force. That's the aircraft, that belong to all of our services: Army, Air Force, Navy,
Gotcha.
And Marines. And yeah, I mean, but to hear them talk last night, and this kept coming up too. To hear them, we have like a second-rate Air Force, a second-rate military, and basically all of our jets and planes are tied together with duct tape. And I think that's kind of dangerously misleading, but it may just be ignorance on their part. I mean, we obviously follow a lot of the Air Force stuff because we have 3 Air Force bases in Oklahoma. We do pilot training in Oklahoma, and we do maintenance of aircraft in Oklahoma. So we know we're always kind of keeping up on the new aircraft because our bases always want some piece of that. And really, I mean, you would come out after watching that debate last night thinking we have almost no bombers. We're still using B-52's our only bomber. It is in heavy use, and Tinker maintains that plane. There's no doubt that it's a very old plane. But it's not the only bomber in service, and we have a lot of fighters, and we're working on a joint strike fighter that will wind up costing over $1 trillion, which is also something that they don't get into. So the whole weapons systems part of that debate was sometimes a bit I don't know, seemed a bit uninformed or deliberately misleading.
2 hours into the debate, one of the most popular tweets was, "When is this thing going to end?" Plus, we also saw the emergence of Frank Underwood from Netflix's House of Cards appear in an ad, which is kind of funny to see stuff like that. Chris, it's always great to catch up with you. As we mentioned off the top of this, there's a lot going on in Washington and, frankly, in the news nationwide today. Thank you very much for your time and context.
Glad to do it, Dave. Good talking to you.
All righty. More coverage from Chris Casteel can be found in the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com, and more politics ahead of us in 2016 as we head towards Iowa in February.